Hello, community. My family is from Mexico City. I was born in Morelia, Michoacan, but from age 4 to 8 I lived with my grandparents in Malva, an area of the capital that has many forested areas. My grandfather is from there, from many generations back, as far as they have records. I loved when he would take me for walks. We went often to La Marquesa, especially to Valle del Conejo, a tourist place where my grandfather had several acquaintances. Once when we went, he told me a story about the place from when he was a child. He told me that his father would take him and his sisters every Sunday to walk. That area always excited them greatly, but especially on rainy days, because the smell of wet earth filled everything and stayed with them even when they returned home. He told me that once they moved a little away from their father and one of his sisters suddenly let out a scream of terror, like he had never heard from her. She had found something. She yelled to her father, but asked that none of the brothers come near. Her father went to help her. Upon seeing what she had found, he told her to run with her brothers to the car and wait for him there. And he, meanwhile, ran to look for an acquaintance from the area. His sister, the one who had seen that thing, was barely 13 years old. But from that day on, she was filled with gray hair. As adults, she told my grandfather and the other siblings what she had seen that day. She told them that when she was walking through the grass, she heard a sound of someone complaining. When she moved some branch, she found an older woman. She seemed injured, but instead of arms, she had long black wings like a vulture's. She could barely see her well because of fear, but the wings and back were of a bird. The legs and head were of a woman. She told them that her father had confirmed that this was a witch, that surely someone had managed to shoot her down the night before. What she never knew is what the people did, the neighbors of the place whom he notified. I know this wasn't a story my grandfather made up to keep me close to him, because he always encouraged me to explore on my own while he chatted with his friends, because he always gave us a lot of freedom. What would you do if you found something like that? The next time you walk through the forest, hello, community. I hope you are prepared for the stories that tonight are going to test what you decide to believe. Stories of astral travels, of religions, of countries that are not strange. Also creatures or entities that we can only find in the forests and that we hope never follow us home. Today I'm going to ask you to let yourselves be carried away by the following stories, and that any problem, any worry, any pending matter stays out there, in the world of the real, of the ordinary. Because here there is no space for that. So, turn off the light if you can do it. Because it's time to fully enter today's stories. Because it's time to move on to the following tales of the night. How are you, Uriel, and all the community? I hope you are very well. Before starting, I want to say that I tell this story with all the respect in the world, especially for the topics I'm going to mention. It may sound incredible, but what I'm going to relate happened to a person of absolutely all my trust. I can put my hands in the fire that this happens, and he truly works as public ministry in the state general prosecutor's office where we live. And although at first he didn't want to tell me this, one day he told me with that tone of someone who needs to unburden himself, of someone who needs to get something out, because it hurts to be the only one who knows it. For obvious reasons, I'm going to omit the names, but he gave me permission to share it. He told me it happened a year ago, in February 2024. It had been a long day, full of work, trials, everything normal in his routine. He arrived home exhausted. He had dinner with his children. They watched a movie. He tucked them in, bathed, and went to bed all like any other day. And it's important that I mention this because I feel that sometimes the strangest things are born from the most everyday moments. Hasn't this happened to you? Just when he was about to fall asleep, the phone rang. It didn't surprise him. In his work, it was common for them to call him at any hour. It was about an authorization that a judge was waiting for. He had approved a search warrant for a residence they had been investigating for days. They were after a guy accused of drug trafficking, besides inspecting if there were drugs or weapons in the house. The team was organized, which included ministerial, state, and municipal police, and in a short time they were on their way. It was a large residence at the end of a private street in a central neighborhood. There weren't many people on the street, which made everything faster. They entered without any problem, without any resistance. Inside, they found the subject they were looking for in one of the first rooms. It was a completely clean operation, without complications. The judge's order was in order. The man didn't put up much resistance, and they secured him immediately. The rest of the people who were in the house were gathered in one room. Everything was going smoothly. Too smoothly. Something rare in these cases. In his experience, people usually get upset, scream, cry, make the operation more difficult. But on this occasion, everything was silent. He was about to give the order to withdraw when one of his colleagues, a state police officer, arrived with a strange expression. "Listen, counselor, have you seen the witch?" "Which witch?" he asked without understanding. "There's a witch in the last room with the others." He had no idea what she was referring to, but curiosity got the better of him and he decided to go see. The room was full of cigarette smoke and barely illuminated by a very weak, very red light. In one corner there were two women sitting on a bed, one young and the other much older. He approached them, told them to be calm, that they already had the suspect they were after and they weren't going against them while he showed them the search warrant. He looked around and noticed something that seemed strange to him. On the back wall he saw a large piece of furniture full of saint figures. An altar, but not just any altar. He recognized that they were images from the Yoruba religion, what some call Santeria. That immediately changed the atmosphere. For him, it was a religion he had dealt with before, and it never brought him good memories. And right there, in front of the saints, stood a child. He couldn't be more than 6 or 7 years old, if that. But he didn't seem nervous. He wasn't hiding or crying like any child would in a situation like that. On the contrary, he was there, firm, with calm eyes, observing him. The cigarette smoke continued in the air, and then the child spoke. "Good evening, counselor. How are you doing?" My relative felt a chill. It was at that moment that he realized that the child was the one who was smoking. For a second, he didn't know what to say. He stood there looking at him, wondering what the hell was happening there. "Good evening," he responded, trying not to show that something was troubling him. "So you're a santero?" "That's right, counselor. I already knew you would come. So don't worry. You can continue with your work." The child's tone. The way he spoke, everything made him sound like an adult in a child's body. "I'm going to check the altar." "Okay," he said, more to follow protocol than for any other reason. The child nodded and stepped aside to let him pass without losing his composure. He lifted his figures carefully, letting them check thoroughly. There was nothing out of the ordinary, nothing illegal. Only saints, herbs, powder, and some objects that my relative couldn't identify. "If you like, you can ask them whatever you want," the child suddenly said, raising the palm of his hand in his direction. He didn't know what to answer. A strange sensation ran through his body. One that he didn't like at all. No, son. It's fine. We're done. We're leaving here." He moved away from there without looking back. The two women only observed him in silence. But when he was leaving, one of them said, "He's serious. You can ask whatever you want and they're going to answer you. He is a witch. He is a very powerful witch. He didn't want to stay any longer in that house." Outside, the rest of the team seemed as uncomfortable as he was. It was as if everyone felt the same urgency to leave. "We're finished. 10:57, he said on the radio. The code to end the operation. They got into the trucks ready to leave, but just before starting he felt someone watching him. He instinctively turned toward the house. There was the child at the door. He was looking at him fixedly with a small smile on his face. With one hand he was waving goodbye, with the other he held the cigarette. It was enough. "Let's go, damn it," he said. And the driver stepped on the accelerator. He arrived home around 3:30. He couldn't sleep well. He kept tossing and turning in bed, thinking about what he had seen. Nothing paranormal had happened, so to speak, in the strict sense of the word. But that child was not normal. He had the obligation to report it to DIF. No one should be smoking at that age, and less in an environment like that. But something inside him told him not to do it, and the strangest thing is that the next day no one on the team mentioned anything, as if everyone had agreed in silence not to talk about the subject. I know, community. I know what I just told you. Nothing terrifying happened to him. He didn't see things moving by themselves or hear voices, but that child was not just any child. If you ask me, I believe there was something more in him. Maybe a witch, maybe something I don't fully understand. I still have thoughts or theories that I don't dare to say, but really, I would love to know your opinions. Can you imagine how many people like this we have met in our lives without realizing it? Hello, Uriel. My name is Judith. I've been listening to your podcast for about 2 years, always on Spotify. I like to put it on when I go on the bus, especially on long trips, but lately I listen to it more often because I'm working on my graduation project, and I spend more time in front of the computer. Coincidentally, the first story I heard was about the girl who bought a goblin and ended up making her life impossible until she had to make a sanctuary for it in her garden, so it would leave her alone. That story marked me a lot. Maybe because stories about goblins have always caught my attention, especially after what happened to me when I was a child. I'm from Managua, the capital of Nicaragua, but for my studies I now live in Costa Rica. My parents are from a small town called Belén, in the province of Rivas. They moved to the capital when they were young, to give a better life to my dad's son and my older sister, who at that time was barely 2 years old. Over the years, my other 2 sisters and I were born, and although we grew up in the city, my parents never stopped taking us to Belén on any holiday to visit the grandparents and family there. What I'm going to tell you happened 10 years ago, when I was 11. It was Easter week, so, as always, my parents took us to Belén. My sister Karen and I stayed at our grandmother's house with my mom, while the rest of the family went to my paternal grandparents' house. Since we were little, we got along better with my mother's family because our cousins were like sisters to us. One of them, young Nellie, had a daughter 3 years before. Her name was Alice, although we all called her Alice. She was a beautiful child, always smiling, sociable, without a gram of shyness. She greeted everyone without hesitation. And when she saw someone new, she would talk to them as if she had known them all her life. She had long brown hair, enormous eyelashes, very white skin, and almond-colored eyes that always shone with joy. But that's why I'm telling you this story. And the strangest thing is that it didn't happen at night, or at a moment when one would expect something paranormal. It was in the morning, before 11, with the sun shining and the whole town awake. Sometimes we think that scares only come in the darkness, but when something has to happen, it happens at whatever time. That day, I was playing in the garden with Andrea, a friend from town. Then my cousin Giovanni interrupted us to ask us to accompany her to take lunch to her boyfriend. Alice's dad thought it was a good idea, and the 4 of us went on the motorcycle. My cousin, her daughter Andrea, and I. In that town, like in many parts of Nicaragua, most people get around by motorcycle. It's normal to see entire families on just one. At that time, there weren't so many police in the area, so nobody said anything. After a few minutes, we left behind the dirt streets and entered the banana plantations, what in Nicaragua we call chayotes. My cousin's boyfriend worked there, harvesting, picking the fruit. Since there was still a while before his break, we decided to wait at the entrance of the plantation while we chatted. Alice, as always, was running around everywhere. Then we heard her say something that made us turn around. "Pepito, Pepito, come, come." Here in Nicaragua, Pepito is a way of saying boy. The three of us looked in the direction she was waving, but there was nobody. Neither Andrea, nor my cousin, nor I could see who she was calling. There was only the empty dirt road. "Alice, who are you talking to?" my cousin asked her. "With the boy," she answered. "The boy who is over there." We remained silent. She kept pointing to the same spot, moving her hand as if someone was really there. My cousin insisted. "Alice, what boy? There's nobody there." But she just smiled. In the end, we thought it was silly. Her imagination. It didn't scare us or anything. We just laughed a little uncomfortably and kept chatting. Alice stopped waving and went back to playing alone, so we gave it even less importance. A little later, a coworker of my cousin's boyfriend came out of the plantation. He told her she could go in to take him his lunch. Before leaving, he told us to keep an eye on Alice. We nodded and she left. Only a few minutes passed when Alice started laughing again. It was her normal laugh, the one she made when something was very funny to her, like when her grandfather played with her when she watched cartoons. But when we turned to see what had her so entertained, we saw it was a snake. It wasn't very big, maybe about 40 centimeters, but that didn't matter. We screamed immediately. The strangest thing wasn't the snake, but Alice's reaction. She wasn't scared. She didn't even flinch when we screamed. She just looked at the snake with a smile. And that was what terrified us most, and it's that Alice was afraid of worms. She couldn't stand to see anything that crawled. Once she saw a caterpillar and started crying, but this time with the snake circling her feet, she had no fear. I tried to run to move her away, but when I got close, the snake lunged toward me. I backed away immediately. Andrea got on the motorcycle from fright, and I did the same. We could only scream and ask for help. But at that moment, we didn't realize something. The snake never tried to attack Alice. It only moved around her as if it were protecting her. We heard footsteps among the leaves of the plantations and saw my cousin and her boyfriend running toward us. We were enjoying what was happening. When we turned to see Alice again, the snake was no longer there. We had taken our eyes off for 2 seconds just to see who was coming. There was no way it could disappear so quickly. My cousin ran to pick up her daughter. We tried to explain what we had seen, but her boyfriend didn't believe us. He told us that if there really had been a snake, Alice would have cried because bugs always scared her. We returned on the motorcycle as soon as we arrived. We told my aunt everything, and she, as if it were the most normal thing in the world, laughed. It was a goblin that surely fell in love with Alice and wanted to take her away. Andrea and I looked at each other immediately. The boy Alice had been talking to, an invisible boy before the snake appeared. My aunt looked at us and added, "They say that unbaptized children can see things that others can't, and goblins get along well with animals. Maybe the snake was just helping her." After that Easter week, my cousin took Alice to be baptized. She never saw anything like that again. Today Alice is 13 years old, and when I tell her that story, she says she doesn't remember anything. She just laughs when I tell her that a goblin wanted to take her away. I hope you read this story and if possible share it. Maybe it's not the most terrifying, but it's the only one I have. And if someday you share it, it will be an honor to be part of the protagonists of Tales of the Night. I want to tell you something very short. Years ago, I had already told you about an astral travel that my mom had, and they even published it on the program. Well, today it's my turn to tell you how I discovered that I can also do them. To begin with, let me tell you that when you don't control it like me, it's something simply terrible. It can be a really terrifying experience, and many times it's difficult to distinguish between a terrible nightmare and a true detachment. I started having very lucid dreams a couple of years ago. Dreams where I saw myself outside the house, and my best friend tried to go in to talk to her, but couldn't manage it. Her street has always scared me a lot, and I hate being there when it gets dark. So it was a nightmare to suddenly wake up there outside her house in the middle of the dawn. The street was full of horrible people that terrify me, but they didn't seem to see me either. Then something happened that changed my life. My stepfather's mother, who is the closest thing I've had to a grandmother, she was diagnosed with anemia and started losing weight tremendously, very quickly. She was a plump lady and suddenly she couldn't get up and was all bones. She always helped all the people she could, so when I went to visit her, which at that time was almost daily, her house was full of people who wanted to be with her and take care of her. Somehow we all knew they were her last days. You could feel it. The one who took care of her most was Edu Viges, a woman very attached to her. She wasn't old. She wasn't even 45, but she had become her best friend for a couple of years. And in those moments of illness, she was the person closest to her. Everyone wondered what my poor grandmother would do if it weren't for Edu Viges. Her house was on a closed street facing a park. I would sit on a bench there when I got desperate from so much pain, so much illness. And from there I could see the coming and going of people visiting her. There, on that bench, I woke up one night at dawn. I remember I had been having nightmares because I was starting to get sick. That always happens to me. But that night was strange because in one of those nightmares, I opened my eyes and I was in the park. At first, I only saw trees and darkness. I didn't know where I was, but soon I recognized the street. I started walking toward grandmother's house. From outside, I noticed that the light in her room was on. I opened the door, walked to the stairs, and then went up. Upon doing so, I realized that her light wasn't really on, but another light, a reddish one, could be seen from under her door. I opened the door without opening it. I don't know how to explain it, but when I entered community, I saw something on top of my grandmother. Something big and hairy. It was on top of her. It was eating something from her chest, as if it were feeding on her. I screamed. I screamed silently inside my dream. And that thing looked up and it was Edu Viges. But she looked different. Her hair was long and dirty, tangled. Her face was full of hair, but also blood. Just like her hands, she showed me her teeth like a wild animal. And at that moment I started crying. I cried so hard that I woke up in my room and my mom came over to see what I had. She had fallen asleep in the living room in front of my room to take care of me. I told her what I had dreamed. My mom took it more seriously than I did. Nobody in the family knows about astral travels, and I think that night my mom understood that it was something that was also going to happen to me. I don't know. Only that mom went that same afternoon along with her husband to see grandmother. I have no idea what they said, who they talked to, or what they did. But Edu Viges never showed up at the house again, and grandmother recovered. Today, a few months later, she is healthier than ever. But yes, now she is much more careful about who enters her house.